Hi, Dr. Muhammad. The phenomenon I chose to do for my presentation or my research study was Black neighborhood segregation in present day America. I chose to do this specific topic because I was shocked to see how much neighborhoods in America and areas in America are still so racially segregated, especially between blacks and whites. This racial segregation has dated back many years in America, and I wanted to get the perspectives of people my age to see if this will ever come to an end or if we're close to coming to an end and their thoughts on it. I also wanted to see how the way they grew up and how this affected their perception of other races because of it. So, I first, getting past my research questions are communities still segregated today because whites are still not ready to accept African Americans into their communities, or because blacks only feel comfortable living amongst other blacks? My second research question was, how do the products of these neighborhoods view other races that they did not grow up with? And my third question is the millennial generation more open to living in diverse communities than the generations prior? So, for the methods of my research, I conducted interviews of four people from IUP. They were two African American individuals and two Caucasian individuals, and they were all from either suburban or urban areas, and they were all from places that were predominantly white or predominantly black. So it wasn't I didn't interview anyone that came from a very culturally diverse area. I specifically wanted to find people that came from either all white or all black places to get their views. So my first interviewee was Trey Weston. He's from North Philadelphia. He's 21 years old, and I asked all of them pretty standard questions amongst all of them, but I kind of took bits and pieces of the interviews that were more interesting to me. So, out of his interview, he basically said that growing up in a predominantly black area, he wasn't around many white people, so his perception of them, he had only really gotten to see them through television and media. So he always thought that they were wealthy people, and he never really had much interaction with white people, so he didn't have much of a view of them, I guess. And another question that stuck out for me during his interview was, would you feel comfortable living in a predominantly white community growing up because he grew up in a predominantly black community? And he said no, because he still feels like today he is viewed as a threat to society, and that he doesn't know if he would be able to like he doesn't know if he would have been able to communicate effectively with people while living in an all white community, or if they were to understand his background and his culture. And I feel like this was a very telling statement because it shows that even though it's 2019, African American males still are worried about being viewed in a criminal manner. My next interview was conducted with Bryce Faulkner. She is a 21-year-old black female from a predominantly white community. She grew up in a suburb outside of Pittsburgh. And I found her interview very thought-provoking because she actually came to IUP, and it was hard for her to interact with other black people because a lot of the people she met were from very urban areas. They were used to growing up around all black people, and it was hard for her to really connect with her own culture, and she found that very difficult. And she found that she understood the white race a little bit better coming into IUP. Now, I'm not sure if that's still the case, but that's what happened when she was a freshman. And I found it interesting that most of my interviewees, when I asked what kind of community they would want to live in if they had a choice, or where they would choose to raise a family, and they mostly all said that they would live in a mixed race community, so they could have their kids could grow up amongst all different types of people, amongst all different types of cultures, so they would be more well-rounded people, and they would understand people for not just their skin color, but also understand a more in-depth reason for how they are. And I also asked her what what would it take for blacks to start moving into these communities and for it to really become more culturally diverse. And she believes that more economic opportunities for black people need to be given in order for them to sustain wealth, and so they're financially able to move into higher class, more white neighborhoods. And I thought that was a very good answer. I hadn't thought about myself, but I really liked her answer. I really liked her interview. And for my second half of my research, I decided to interview two white people. So my first interview was with Anthony White, and he was actually from a predominantly black community. He was from Penn Hills, which is a suburb right outside of Pittsburgh, and it's predominantly black. And he actually said that if he were to raise his kids, if he were to decide where he wanted to raise his kids, he would actually have them grow up in a neighborhood like his own, because even though he was most of the time the only white person or the only white person amongst a lot of black people, he always felt welcome. And he thinks that his race, the Caucasian race, doesn't welcome other races as much as black people, and he always felt welcome. And he would, if he had to choose, he would have his kids grow up in an area like his. And I also asked him, specifically for his interview, I asked him, why does he think more white people do not live in black communities, and if that will ever change. And he thinks many white people have a stigma against African Americans that dates back generations. And this is his quote, "They view blacks in their communities as dangerous, threatening, and unpredictable." And I thought that was very interesting coming from a white male to say that, just because based on his environment and where he was from, he has very different opinions than other white people that didn't grow up in black communities. And my last interview was with Abby Fish. She was from Butler, PA, which is also a suburb outside of Pittsburgh, a predominantly white suburb. And she explained that she was used to growing up around people that looked just like her, and she wasn't used to many other cultures, blacks, Hispanics, Asians. She never had been around those. And she even admits that when she came to IUP, it was almost like a culture shock, and she would be afraid to be in certain situations where it was mostly African Americans or mostly Latinos, because she felt that it was, she felt like the only real interaction that and perception that she had of those people was from rap music and media. So she viewed them in a very derogatory way, and she was almost afraid of them in a way when she first came to IUP, and it was hard for her to connect with other students that weren't white. And when I asked how as a nation we could solve the issue of neighborhood segregation, she was very stumped. It took her like a good 2 minutes to answer this question, because it's something that as a white individual she hadn't really thought much of, and she hadn't really cared much to give that much thought to. And her answer in the end was very direct. She said white people need to change the way they view other races, or significant change will never happen. And she says that even for herself, she has learned to view them in a different light, because she has come to college and because she's had to be around many different races. She's realized that the stigmas and the perceptions of other races is not always true, and that white people sometimes need to open their minds more. And I think she thinks that if with a mindset change, it could possibly come to an end. Neighborhood segregation could possibly come to an end. So my research questions, my first research question about if neighborhood segregation was because whites are not ready to accept African Americans, or because blacks are only feel comfortable living amongst other black people. I thought my research was kind of inconclusive on this question, because I was only able to interview college students that didn't really get to choose where they were from. They still live with their parents now. They haven't chosen a place to reside yet, and they haven't picked what kind of culture and what kind of neighborhood they're going to live in. So it was hard for me to kind of get this question answered, because they're not in a position yet to buy their own house, or to live by themselves, or to live on their own. So it was kind of unclear. So I kind of wish I was able to interview more people that were actually in the workforce and that actually had bought or rented their own home and chose where they wanted to live, to see if they gravitated to more communities that were more along the lines of their race, and if they changed where they lived from their childhood. So my second question is, how do the products of these neighborhoods view other races? And I thought my research showed that the products of racially segregated environments have a tough time relating to other races when they're put into a college environment where they're around many other types of people. And the common misconceptions and stereotypes about all the races kind of made them ignorant towards other races because they had never been around those people, and it was hard for them to form any other type of opinion.